Welcome back to the Regular Pioneer channel. I'm your host, Matt, and thank you for joining me for another episode. This week, around the world, Jehovah's Witnesses will be considering the study watchtower entitled Love and Justice in the Face of Wickedness. This article is about child abuse, more specifically, child sexual abuse. If you've been following my channel from the very beginning, one of the things you know about me is that I left the Jehovah's Witness organization, and one of the reasons why was because of the systemic child sexual abuse and the way it's handled. I wanted to review this watchtower this week because I feel it's very important to point out the dishonesty of the watchtower organization when it comes to this article, point out the gaps in logic, and also point out the things that are just totally missing and need to be included. So we're going to get into this article. I might go off on tangents here and there, but trust me, it's important. The information that I provide here, please, I want you to look it up. If you are an active Jehovah's Witness watching this, and maybe you want to rebut what I say, I encourage you to cross-reference the things I say. Look them up. Don't take the words I'm saying as just some apostate lies or opposer lies. No. I'm saying these things based off of fact. So please, look up the things that I mentioned in this video. Cross-reference the things that I say. Because trust me, there's some serious issues. There's some serious dishonesty and evasion when it comes to what is being handled in this article. Well, let's get into it. As you can see, I have my shirt and tie on and a jacket. Back in the day, I used to be the backup watchtower conductor in the first congregation that I was in. So, I figured, hey, when in Rome, right? So the theme scripture for the article comes from Psalm 5 and verse 4. It says, "You are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness. No one bad may remain with you." And if you know anything about some of the specific cases of child sexual abuse in the Jehovah's Witness organization, you see how ironic the use of that scripture is. Now, if you're not familiar with Jehovah's Witness study articles, what they normally do in the first few paragraphs is set the table for the main point of the article. So paragraphs 1 through 3 basically are stating that they feel that Jehovah, their God, is against all forms of wickedness, especially child sexual abuse. And they state specifically that child sexual abuse is a worldwide plague, and true Christians, or they're specifically talking about Jehovah's Witnesses, have been affected by this plague, which is true. Jehovah's Witnesses have definitely been affected by this plague, and child sexual abuse is a worldwide issue. But here's just a thought. It says that Jehovah God hates all forms of wickedness, and this is from paragraph 1. How he must hate child sexual abuse, and especially repugnant wicked deed. If Jehovah hates child sexual abuse so much, why hasn't it been mentioned in the Bible? Why weren't there any scriptures that said directly that child sexual abuse is a terrible thing? I mean, let's think about it. There are a lot of things specifically mentioned in the Bible as wrong. There are prohibitions in the Bible on mixing cotton and polyester, eating blood, getting a tattoo, working on a certain day, charging interest, looking at a woman and having a desire for her. So if all those specific things are mentioned, why couldn't Jehovah, the all-seeing, omnipotent God, mention child abuse as something that shouldn't happen? Just a thought. So, moving on to the subheading, a grave sin. Now, in paragraphs 4 through 9, it mentions how child abuse is considered a sin. And if you are a religious person, you believe in the concept of sinning, and you should believe that child sexual abuse is a sin. Now, paragraph 5 calls it a sin against the victim. Paragraph 6 calls it a sin against the congregation. Paragraph 7 calls it a sin against the secular authorities. And paragraph 8 says, above all, it is a sin against God. Now, it's certainly true that it is a sin against the victim, and it is a sin against the congregation and secular authorities. And if you believe in God, it certainly should be considered a sin against God. But let's look specifically at something said in paragraph 6. I'm going to read it in full. It says, when someone who is part of the congregation becomes guilty of child abuse, he brings reproach on the congregation. How unfair that is to the millions of faithful Christians who are putting up a hard fight for the faith. Let's pause there. If you've been a Jehovah's Witness in the past 20 years, one of the things, without a doubt, you've heard from the stage at a Kingdom Hall, or at an assembly, or at a convention, was that the Catholic Church allowed child molestation to go on. Jehovah's Witnesses ragged on the Catholic Church for years. They always brought up, oh, they have priests molesting children. Ironic, considering the systemic child sexual abuse that goes on in the Jehovah's Witness organization. Now, that phrase, how unfair that is to the millions of faithful Christians who are putting up a hard fight for the faith. Wouldn't you say the ragging that Jehovah's Witnesses did on the Catholic Church was unfair to the faithful Catholics who weren't raping children? But no, Jehovah's Witnesses wasn't worried about taking it easy on them. So why should anyone take it easy on the Jehovah's Witnesses now? Now, I agree you shouldn't make reckless generalizations, but again, Jehovah's Witnesses were not concerned at all with the faithful Catholics who weren't raping children. So why shouldn't Jehovah's Witnesses be generalized in the same way? Follow your own rules. Practice what you preach, Jehovah's Witnesses. Here's another issue in paragraph 6. It says, we do not tolerate in our midst individuals who unrepentantly commit wicked deeds and bring reproach on the good name of the congregation. Now, anecdotally, there are many stories of Jehovah's Witnesses who were encouraged not to go to the police, who were encouraged to not report their abuser, and their abuser continued existing in the congregation. But rather than give you an anecdotal story, what I want you to do is consider some actual numbers, some actual statistics. If you've never heard of the Australian Royal Commission in 2015, I want you to pause the video now, go to your search engine, and look it up. The Australian Royal Commission, Jehovah's Witnesses. What this Australian Royal Commission found was that there were 1,006 cases of child sexual abuse that were never reported to the authorities by Jehovah's Witness elders, going back to the year 1950. 1,006 known cases, this is just known cases, that were never reported to the authorities. If that isn't bad enough, there was another case that I'm going to mention as we go further in this article. And in the legal documents, one of the things that was found out was that the Jehovah's Witnesses have a database of child molesters, over 23,000 child molesters that they have refused to turn over to the superior authorities, that they have refused to turn over to defense attorneys, that they have refused to turn over to the media. Over 23,000. Now, don't just take my word for it. If you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this and you're saying, nah, that's not true, please look it up for yourself. Jehovah's Witnesses, 23,000 plus on this database of child molesters that Jehovah's Witnesses have refused to turn over to the authorities. So much so that at one point they were being fined $4,000 a day and eventually ended up settling for millions of dollars because they refused to turn over this database. Now, if you're a faithful Jehovah's Witness giving your donations, you probably think your donations are going to the worldwide work for good and positive things. But many of your donations are going to pay for child sexual abuse lawsuits and protecting child sexual abusers on a database. Please look up the Candace Conti case. Candace Conti, unfortunately, was a child sexual abuse victim when she was a young Jehovah's Witness. Look up that case. Make sure you understand how much money this organization is paying out simply because they refuse to deal with abusers. Now let's move on. Paragraph 9 is a very, very interesting paragraph. It says, over the years, Jehovah's organization has provided an abundance of scriptural information on the subject of child abuse. For example, articles in the Watchtower and Awake have discussed how those who have been sexually abused can deal with emotional scars, how others can help and encourage them, how parents can protect their children. Elders have received detailed scriptural training on how to deal with the sin of child abuse. The organization continues to review the way congregations handle the sin of child abuse. Why? To make sure that our way of handling the matter is in harmony with the law of Christ. Now that's the paragraph in full. Here's some thoughts on that. Number one, it talks about how to deal with being sexually abused and the emotional scars. But as you look through all of the articles referenced in this article, there's a box that has all of these articles that are supposed to help someone who has been sexually abused. None of these articles mention seeking a mental health professional. Not one of them mentions going to a psychiatrist or a therapist. All of them just use prayer and reading the scriptures as some magic talisman that will heal you from being a sexual assault victim. Now, if you're a religious person, there's nothing wrong with praying and reading your holy book. Absolutely, that's a fine thing. But that will not heal the physical wounds of abuse. That will not heal the mental wounds of abuse. I know some Jehovah's Witnesses who I was very, very close with who were sexually abused as children. And even as adults in their 30s, you can see the effects on them. It's truly terrible. They need more than just prayer and reading Bible scriptures. These people need to get medical help. And the organization is not even suggesting for people to do that. That is dangerous. And it is not helping children who have been victims of terrible abuse. Here's another thought. It says that the organization continues to review and make sure that they're in harmony with the law of the Christ. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Christ is the head of the congregation. Well, Christ's law hasn't changed in over 2,000 years, so why does the organization need to keep changing policy and procedure? If Jesus Christ is the head of the congregation, and if Jesus Christ has been the head of the congregation according to Jehovah's Witness doctrine when he chose the organization as the one and true religion in the year 1919, why would Jesus need to keep giving the branch representatives and the service department and the governing body and local elders new procedure? Why didn't Jesus just set one procedure in 1919 for child sexual abuse and let it move forward? Just something to think about. Now, moving on to paragraphs 10 through 12, there's a subheading, Handling Instances of Serious Wrongdoing. So here we're getting into the serious parts of the child sexual abuse and how it's handled by Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, in paragraph 11, it says something very interesting in the first sentence. In addition, if the wrongdoer is a part of the congregation, elders are concerned with trying to restore him if that is possible. And it references James chapter 5, verses 14 and 15. Now, what they're talking about is spiritual restoration. Elders are in charge of the Jehovah's Witness congregations to keep the congregation spiritually clean. And so when it's talking about restoring a wrongdoer or a molester, they're talking about restoring them to have good privileges or to be what Jehovah's Witnesses say, in good standing. What they're not talking about, though, is how someone who commits a heinous crime like that needs mental help, and they need to seek some kind of clinical help. Jehovah's Witnesses cannot provide that kind of help. I was an elder. I was not trained at all on how to help a pedophile change, except for, read the scriptures and pray. Again, Jehovah's Witnesses are attempting to use prayer and the Bible as some magic talisman that will fix all of these issues. If someone is a pedophile, if someone has sexually abused children, there's a very high chance that they will reoffend. There's also the fact that that's not something that they can just get over with prayer and with self-control. That's something they need serious help with. And Jehovah's Witness elders are not trained to provide that kind of help. So it is dangerous to insinuate that elders can help restore someone who has done such a heinous thing. It also mentions that if someone is genuinely repentant, that they can once again be in good standing in the congregation. But here's the problem. Jehovah's Witnesses do judicial committees. I've done a video on this before, but in a judicial committee, 3 elders sit in front of a wrongdoer who is said to have committed a gross sin, and they judge whether that person is repentant or sorry for the sin that they committed. But as someone who has served on a judicial committee before, I can't read anyone's heart. I don't know if that person is really sorry. And especially when you're talking about someone who has molested a child, they're very likely to reoffend. How can I say that, oh, you know what, they're sorry and they're not going to do this again? It's safe to put them back in the congregation. I can't say that. I cannot read anyone's heart or mind. Neither can any other Jehovah's Witness elder. Now, it's at this point I'd like to tell you about someone who was a former Jehovah's Witness elder and was a child molester. If you've never heard of this case, again, after I tell you this person's name, I'd like for you to look them up. I'd like for you to look up the Jehovah's Witness organization's response to learning about his abuse and seeing how impotent it was. I'd like for you to understand, by reading the proceedings from the legal case, how far this disgusting man went in abusing children, how many times it was accused, how many times it was admitted to be true, and the organization did little to nothing about it. This man's name is Gonzalo Campos. Gonzalo Campos was a Jehovah's Witness in the San Diego area in California. And he was accused, I'm just going to read some years off, that he was accused of committing child sexual abuse. 1982, 1983, 1984, and 1986, he was actually reproved for child sexual abuse. But somehow, in 1988, he became a ministerial servant anyway. In 1993, he was appointed as an elder. But he was disfellowshipped in 1995 for child sexual abuse. And eventually, he fled to his native Mexico in 2010, avoiding these claims and the law. Now, he is known to have 6 victims. There may be more. But this is someone who was a known child sexual abuser, reported to the organization, and nothing was done. So much so was the organization's weakness when it came to child sexual abuse, he was appointed as a ministerial servant. Then later he was appointed as an elder. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses like to teach that Jehovah, God's Holy Spirit, appoints brothers in the congregation. You mean to tell me Jehovah, God's Holy Spirit, appointed that man who abused 6 different victims, maybe more? Find that hard to believe. Well, let's also consider paragraph 12. I just want to read this. Keep this in mind. Listen to the words here. Clearly, elders have a weighty responsibility. They care deeply about the flock that God has entrusted to them. They want their brothers and sisters to feel secure in the congregation. For that reason, they act promptly when they receive a report of serious wrongdoing, including child abuse. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second because, as I mentioned, I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I was an elder. I read the child abuse policy back and forth. That was one of the first things I read when I became an elder, because I was very interested as to how this was worked on, how, this was handled. It says here in the paragraph that elders act promptly when they receive a report of serious wrongdoing. What they really mean is elders call the branch promptly. The way they word it is very ambiguous. They want you to believe that, elders go to the authorities. They call the police. You're instructed to call the branch and ask them for assistance when you receive an allegation of child sexual abuse. The branch, not the police, the branch office. Keep that in mind. Now, we're going to go on to paragraphs 13 and 14, but before we do, I just want to read something for you from the Insight book. If you don't know what the Insight book is, it is Jehovah's Witnesses Encyclopedia. Here's what the Insight book says when giving a definition of the word lie. Lying generally involves saying something false to a person who is entitled to know the truth. Wouldn't you say the average rank and file Jehovah's Witness is entitled to know how elders are told to handle child sexual abuse? To me, that policy should be released to everyone, not just elders. But I'll continue from the Insight book. It says, the Hebrew verb shakar means deal or act falsely, and the noun form is rendered lie, deception, falsehood. Now going forward, I want you to think of that definition, and you tell me if the Jehovah's Witnesses are lying or not. Now, in paragraphs 13 and 14, paragraph 13 starts with a question in bold. Do elders comply with secular laws about reporting an allegation of child abuse to the secular authorities? Yes. In places where such laws exist, elders endeavor to comply with secular laws about reporting allegations of abuse. Notice the language there. Notice the framing there. In places where such laws exist. Where don't these laws exist? Now, I'm sure there are some remote places and there are some, unfortunate places where those laws don't exist. But in the vast world, laws about child sexual abuse exist. So the fact that they even frame that answer when saying in places where such laws exist. And it's interesting, Jehovah's Witnesses love to teach that principles are more important than commands. They always tell the story about Joseph and Potiphar's wife, and they always mention that at the time there was no law against fornication or sleeping with another man's wife, but he still knew it was wrong. So even if a law doesn't exist, child sexual abuse is wrong. Stop it and report it. It's very simple. But they frame it in a way to say, in places where such laws exist. Pay attention to the language. It also says, elders endeavor to comply with secular laws about reporting allegations of abuse. Why is the word endeavor used there? And why does it say they endeavor to comply? That makes it sound like it's some kind of burden. Oh, well, listen, I'm just trying to comply. I'm trying to work with it. And why does it need to be a serious endeavor? Would you consider it an endeavor to pick up the phone, call 911? Would you consider it a serious endeavor to drive to the police station and give a report? And would you call that complying, or would you call that doing the right thing? Should be common sense, but to Jehovah's Witnesses, it is not. Now, it says in paragraph 14, it uses this odd language that abuse victims are free to report an allegation. Well, who said that they aren't free to report an allegation? Why would you frame it in that manner? You got to notice the little things, the insidious ways that they frame conversations. They won't tell you straight up, but they're not very interested in these allegations going to police because they know it'll be bad publicity for the organization. Now, it's very interesting, just going back to paragraph 13, that it says elders seek direction on how they can comply with these laws. Why would you need direction on reporting a serious crime like child abuse? For example, let's say someone stole your car, right? And it's a nice car, right? Let's say it's a beautiful American muscle car, 1970 Pontiac GTO, candy paint, racing stripe on it, beautiful, right? And someone in your Jehovah's Witness congregation steals your car. You saw them do it, and you have it on camera. What would you do? Would you pick up the phone and, hey, brother coordinator of the body of the elders, listen, Brother Smith stole my car. What? What do you mean? Yeah, I saw him do it. I got it on camera. Oh, okay, well, that's terrible. We're going to take care of it. Then brother coordinator of the body of elders calls brother secretary, and they call the branch. And they say, branch, someone got their car stolen. It's on video. What do we do? The branch gives them some direction. Then they talk to the elders. They investigate. They form a judicial committee. And they make sure Brother Smith is going to get in some trouble for stealing Brother Jackson's car. Now you might be saying, Matt, that is a really stupid illustration. I agree. But you know what that is? Jehovah's Witness procedure for child sexual abuse. When an allegation is found out, elders call the branch office first for direction. Then they investigate. Then if they get a confession or they find out that it did happen, they form a judicial committee. But they should call the police first. If someone steals your car and you're a Jehovah's Witness, your first call isn't to your coordinator, it's to the police. That's common sense. You shouldn't need to be told that. And the fact that it's even framed in the way that elders try to comply, they endeavor to comply, there needs to be no endeavoring. It needs to be pick up phone, call police. It's a very simple concept. In any other situation, when there's an issue, if your car gets stolen, if someone breaks into your home, you call the police. Why would you not do that when a child gets molested? If you saw someone breaking into your neighbor's home, you would call the police, wouldn't you? So if you know, as a Jehovah's Witness elder, that a child has been molested, why wouldn't you call the police? Why do you need to call the branch for direction? You know you need to call the police. Why isn't that expressly said in this article? Nowhere in this article does it mention calling the police. Jehovah's Witnesses love to mention that they respect the superior authorities, as is mentioned in Romans chapter 13 and verse 1, but somehow the police is not mentioned at all in this article. Let's continue. Paragraphs 14 and 15, the two-witness rule. I'm going to read part of paragraph 15 for you. It says, in the congregation, before elders take judicial action, why are at least two witnesses required? This requirement is part of the Bible's high standard of justice. When there is no confession of wrongdoing, two witnesses are required to establish the accusation and authorize the elders to take judicial action. That's all well and good, but there's one major issue when we're talking about child sexual abuse. Most abuse doesn't happen in front of anyone else. It's just the abuser and the victim. There's a reason why we call these people predators, because they're like animals in the wild seeking to isolate their prey. They're not committing these acts in front of anyone else, so the likelihood of there being another witness is slim to none. Jehovah's Witnesses, like any other Christian religion, play a la carte with the Bible. They apply what they want. They find some things literal. They find some things symbolic. They apply what they want when it comes to doctrine. They could easily choose to ignore this doctrine like they do many other things in the Bible, but they choose to stick to this one that protects abusers. Now, paragraph 16 again mentions this endeavor to comply nonsense. And again, there is no endeavor. You don't need to endeavor. The framing of that, even using that language, is so odd. Just pick up the phone and call the police. Now, I just wanted to mention really quickly, when I was a Jehovah's Witness elder, I did deal with a case of child sexual abuse. In the congregation I was last in, there was a man in the congregation who admitted to sexually abusing his wife's younger daughter. Now, it didn't happen even in our country or in our congregation, but I saw the letters of correspondence that came from the branch in that country in South America. I saw the correspondence from our congregation and from the local congregation that spoke to the little sister who was abused. None of those correspondences mentioned calling the police. None of those correspondences mentioned that the victim was given any kind of professional mental health assistance. But of course, they offered loving scriptures and prayer, because prayer is just used as a talisman, a magic talisman to fix all your issues. And again, prayer and reading a holy book, if you're religious, is a good thing. That's fine. But that cannot alone fix the scars of sexual abuse. It's also worth noting, it mentions in paragraph 16 that, it gives this whole overview of how things are supposed to go. A lot of this policy is new. So kids for years have been taken advantage of and had to deal with shoddy policy. And, they think they're special now by saying that it's very rare that a child will have to talk about an allegation in front of their accuser. But that's very new policy. For years, children were being abused. They said something about it, and they had to face their abuser in front of the elders and say that they were sexually abused by them. Do you know how intimidating that is to a child? But of course, Jehovah's Witnesses will tell you that, God's Spirit was on that. Yo, yeah, sure. But then when you corner them on that, they'll tell you, well, listen, all right, maybe they got it wrong back in the day, but the light gets brighter, right? Again, if Christ is the head of the congregation and chose this organization as the true religion in 1919, as Jehovah's Witnesses teach, why would Christ be allowing that? Something for you to think about. Now let's go on to paragraphs 17 and 18. Something that just stood out to me, I thought was very interesting, in paragraph 18. It says that when elders serve on a judicial committee, their role is spiritual or religious. And then the next sentence starts by saying, guided by the scriptures, they judge whether the abuser is repentant or not. Now, this might be minutia. This might seem like a small thing, but it says guided by the scriptures rather than guided by God's Holy Spirit. As an elder, you're taught that God's Holy Spirit is with you when you make a judicial decision. But here they say guided by the scriptures. So to me that says they're just reading the Bible and trying to make the best decision. They're almost admitting in a Freudian way that God's Spirit is not guiding these men. And as someone who has served on judicial committees, I found that out the hard way, that God's Spirit is not on those proceedings. It's really just a bunch of dudes making a decision. But I also wanted to mention that in the paragraph it says the abuser may never qualify to receive any congregation privileges or serve in any position of responsibility in the congregation. They throw that qualifier in there, may, because they could serve again, which is seemingly ridiculous. If you were a child abuser, you should never be serving in a position of authority ever again. But Jehovah's Witnesses believe that, it's okay. He can be fixed. She can be fixed. I think not. And it's not to say that someone who has committed that kind of heinous crime can't rebuild their life and become better through psychological help and other kinds of clinical means. But it is not safe to put that person in a position of responsibility in a religious organization where there are children present. It just isn't. Now, here's something of interest. It mentions that the elders may privately warn the parents of minors, and when taking such measures, the elders are careful to maintain the privacy of those hurt by the sin. There's a big issue with privately warning little Jimmy's mom and Maria's mom and Carlos' dad and Malik's parents. When you just privately warn them, all right, maybe some parents in the congregation know that Brother John Doe is a sexual abuser, but you're not telling the whole congregation. And there's a reason why you should tell the whole congregation. What if Sister Friendly wants to have a congregation barbecue and invite everybody over? She doesn't know that Brother John Doe is a child molester, but she's going to invite Brother John Doe, and he might be present around all those children. Elders keep information confidential, and they don't tell ministerial servants or other brothers in the congregation. And in some congregations, sisters take the lead when it comes to the ministry because they don't have enough men around. So, what if they're going out in the ministry to go door to door, and the person taking the lead doesn't know that Brother John Doe molests children, and they end up putting Brother John Doe in a car group with little Susie? You see why it's not helpful to keep that information so private? And now I understand the privacy of the victim is very important. You don't want the victim's information out there, but it is of vital importance for everyone around there to know that this person has committed child sexual abuse. There's a reason why people who commit those heinous crimes have to sign up and their names are listed on the internet. That should be announced in the congregation. For comparison, my wife and I are no longer Jehovah's Witnesses, and we disassociated from the organization. That was announced in the congregation because people like us who no longer believe the doctrine are considered spiritually dangerous. So if we're dangerous simply because we don't believe the doctrine anymore, how dangerous is someone who molests children? Why isn't that announced from the stage? Hey, Brother John Doe is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses because they are a child sexual abuser. Or Brother John Doe has been reproved because they are a child sexual abuser. I think that's a lot more important to announce than someone who doesn't believe the doctrine anymore. My wife and I told the elders on a Tuesday that we were done. That next Tuesday, they announced that we were no longer Jehovah's Witnesses. But there are some child sexual abusers who are put on private reproof. They face a judicial committee, they're deemed repentant, and it's not even announced to the congregation. That is dangerous and insidious evil. Now, let's go on to paragraphs 19 through 22. Paragraph 19 starts by saying, who have the responsibility to protect children from harm? Parents do. I don't disagree there. Parents do have the main responsibility of protecting children from harm. I'm a parent. I have the primary responsibility of protecting my daughter from harm. But here's the issue with them saying that in that way. Elders are the ones in the congregation who are privy to the information of who are child sexual abusers and who aren't. They're the ones that deal with these judicial committees. They're the ones in Jehovah's Witness doctrine that are supposed to keep the congregation clean. So why are you taking the responsibility away from them now? You know what it is? It's a way for Jehovah's Witnesses to put the onus on parents when their children get abused and take it away from the organization. Now, in paragraph 21, it mentions about maintaining good communication with your children and making sure that your child is not afraid to speak up about abuse and not feel that they won't be believed. And those are good things. But here's an overlying issue. If you were raised as a Jehovah's Witness, one of the things you know is that you are not supposed to take one of your fellow brothers or sisters to court. You also know that you never want to bring reproach on Jehovah's name. So no matter how much you tell them, oh, you should be honest, you should tell, don't worry about that. A child will have that internal reverential fear for their God Jehovah, and they don't want to bring reproach on the organization's name. I know a person personally who did not speak up about abuse because of that as a child. They didn't want to bring reproach on God's name, even though their parents said, no, it's okay, you can talk to us about anything. When you put that fear in a child, when you put all of that responsibility on a child, it causes them to not be honest about their abuse that they're suffering. I mean, come on, let's just use basic logic here. If God is all powerful, if God is almighty, can God not protect his own name? Let the children worry about being protected. God can take care of his own name. Why isn't God protecting these children from abuse? Just something you need to think about. Now, paragraph 22 mentions the box, educate yourself and your children. When you look through all of these references, not one of them mentions calling the police. Not one of them mentions seeking mental help, seeking clinical help after you've been abused. All of them just use the Bible and prayer as a magic talisman to fix the issues that abuse has caused. Again, that is wholly dangerous. It is not a good precedent to set. When people have suffered at the hands of abuse, they need professional help. They need for the authorities to get involved. And none of these articles mentions those things. At the end of the article, if you're familiar with Jehovah's Witness study articles, if there's an article to follow, they always say, oh, well, what will we learn in the next article? I want to read for you the last paragraph. It says, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we view child sexual abuse as a gross sin and a wicked deed. Governed by the law of the Christ, our congregations do not shield perpetrators of abuse from the consequences of their sins. Meanwhile, what can we do to help those who have suffered abuse? The next article will answer that question. I'm just going to give you the answer. They just want you to read scriptures with them and pray for them and encourage them. They don't mention going to the police. They don't mention opening civil suits. They don't mention going to see a therapist, going to counseling, going to a psychiatrist. No. Just use that magic Bible. It's going to cure everything. And again, if you're a religious person and you want to pray and you want to read the scriptures for comfort, that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you've suffered abuse, you should be seeking the assistance of a mental health professional. And never once in this article or the next or all of the articles mentioned do the Jehovah's Witnesses even suggest doing so. That is unsafe and it is not a good precedent to set. That was my rebuttal on this week's Watchtower. Please look up Gonzalo Campos, look up Jonathan Kendrick, look up the Australian Royal Commission on Jehovah's Witnesses in 2015. Look up the database that Jehovah's Witnesses have of 23,000 plus child molesters that they refuse to turn over to the authorities. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. See it yourself. Please understand the Jehovah's Witnesses are giving a huge piece of propaganda this week with this study article. I want everyone to understand the lies and the dishonesty. Please, if you are an active Jehovah's Witness, ask questions to your local elders, to your circuit overseer. Write letters to the organization. Ask them pointed and serious questions and push for them to make the child sexual abuse policy letter open to everyone, not just elders. Please, be very careful with your children around Jehovah's Witnesses. I would tell people not even to answer the door when Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking, because you don't know if that person knocking could be a child molester. Well, this is Matt. Thank you again for joining me on the Irregular Pioneer channel. Be well, folks. I'll see you again soon. And please, take very good care of your children.